Right, Mel? Can't do it without Medfield TV. Backbone of the town.
But Jerry, once you start, do you want me to switch to slides, or do you want it on your camera and you?
If you can do it, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
I'm not logging into Zoom. We've had enough challenges. So I just have the deck on my...
We got audio.
Okay, well, we are going to get this started. Apologies to everyone who logged in on time, and thank you for your patience with us as we got this all moving. My name is Jerry Potts. I'm chair of the Open Space and Recreation Committee. We have Lauren. You want to introduce yourself?
I'm Lauren Beetlesbacher from Parks and Rec Commission.
George?
I'm George Lester. Am I at-large member? Is that what I'm considered? Yes, at-large member of the Open Space Recreation Planning Committee.
Corinne?
Corinne Schieffer, also at-large member.
And I'm Sarah Raposa. I'm the town planner, but I'm also the planning board's designee for the Open Space and Rec Plan Committee.
And the star, our consultant, Wayne, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Wayne Fiden. I'm consultant for this with Plan Sustain.
And we do have a couple of other, actually, I guess it's just Jess, right? Jess Riley, who is also a committee member, who could not attend in person. I'm sorry? Oh, Kat, yes, I don't have her on the slide. Well, there you go. How did I miss that one? That's the expert, yes, and Kat
Actually,
as
Wayne,
well.
do you want to share your screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we're going to do just quickly, unless something goes very dangerously wrong, I mean, we will be here, and it's an open forum, so if any of you are watching this on Medfield TV or on Zoom and want to come down, we are here in Town Hall, and we will be here. We're planning on being here until 6:30, but our prepared remarks are not that long. God help us, right? So just quickly, the Open Space and Recreation Plan, this helps us basically guide our open space, recreation, preservation, programming, management, maintenance. It includes the conservation areas and greenways, the park and recreation, as we all enjoy, one of the great things of our town. It also handles the federal, state, and nonprofit partners open space, private land that's permanently protected with conservation restrictions, private land temporarily protected with Chapter 61, 61A, and 61B. And then trail connections. And if we go to the next slide, there's been a whole lot of discussion on this. We've had 2 public forums and hearings. There was 2019, and we're going to be doing one very soon, which will be a more refined. We'll talk a little bit about that later, drilling down a little bit on what we got from the first forums and the survey that was already done. We have some additional questions that we're going to ask the community. We've received written comments, and you'll see at the end a link to a place where you can add any comments, and we encourage you during the month of March to do that. I think, well, you won't care because...
I'll be here.
But I think we have a little gift certificate thingy that still is in there. But you'll also have just the satisfaction of giving us good feedback. I know no one's doing it for the gift certificate. And we've also consulted with a number of the town boards. We have representation from some of those. There was a past open space and recreation plan from 2017. We had the townwide master plan, which was approved in 2021. The select board provided their goals for 2023. And we also were fortunate enough to have the incredible work that was done by the Medfield State Hospital Planning Committee, which was 4 years of work. So all of that feedback is funneled our way, and really our responsibility is then to take it and refine it specifically around open space and recreation. And we have some goals which we'll go through today that I think are critical. But with that, I'm fine in just quickly, this community that we love. Open space is a huge part of it. We have a very rich history being here on the Charles. 38% of the town is in protected open space. We have the Charles River Basin, hills north and south, park and recreation, interconnecting trails. That's 38% of the town. So it's a huge amount. We also, our median per capita income is slightly higher than that in Massachusetts. Family income is also higher. and we have more residents that are in their prime earning years. So all of that you know about Medfield, you're in this community. I'm going to turn it over to Wayne at this point, and Wayne is going to kick in more into the specifics on sort of where we're headed.
Thanks very much. So I have a lot of slides I want to go through very quickly because the primary purpose of this forum is to hear from people both here and people at home. So some of the slides, when I don't go over all the words, they're really supposed to be teasers. It's supposed to get you to want to go read the plan. So if I skip things, that's why. It's that it's going forward. So just generally, I mean, you all know Medfield much better than I do. You had a spurt of single-family homes and subdivisions until 20 years ago now, I guess. You have a population that's older than both Massachusetts and the state as a whole. Your population was growing quickly. It shrank a little bit. Now it's been growing at a moderate rate, all of which means you have some demand for new housing, which is competing with open space. And so you have 38% of the town is open space, but it feels like a lot more because you still have some farms, you still have some forest, which is privately owned, but actively looks like open space. So of course, when that gets developed, you're all going to hear from your neighbors saying, "Oh, isn't that horrible?" So that's the point of the background. I'm not going to go through this other than just saying this stuff is in the plan. So we have a lot of information about the environmental setting that's here. It's important because open space acquisitions, because the quality of all your homes are based on the environment that's here. I don't want to bore you with the details now, but we spent a lot of time trying to understand what are the jargon is sensitive environmental receptors, right? Where does the water department identify your water supply coming from? Where does the Army Corps look at sort of the Charles River Basin floodplain? So all those kinds of things we try to identify because they're important features. Again, I'm not going to go over that. What I really am trying to get to quickly is the actions that are recommended itself. So the one part of the plan which is still in early draft form, just to warn you, is the inventory. George is working very hard on that. Sarah's working on that. So that's not so much, it's more descriptive. So we don't need so much public forum for that. It sort of says, what do you own? What does the state, federal, and nonprofits own? And what are the day-to-day management goals for those properties? So that's the part that's still coming. As you heard in the beginning, we're building on lots of previous plans. So in the plan itself, we spend more time citing, say, here are the goals, how we're citing that in the process. So I'm not going to go through this. For this plan itself, there's an overall vision, but the vision was stolen from the master plan. This analysis of needs, it's pretty straightforward. Goals and objectives came from both the townwide master plan and the select board's goals for 2023. So we're trying to bring them in. The part that I'm going to spend most of the time talking about now is the 7-year action plan. Those are the 11 actions which right now the committee is recommending be the town's focus for the next 7 years. So the first of those 11 is adopt the Community Preservation Act. Community Preservation Act is in essence a surcharge on property tax that funds 4 things. It funds open space, recreation, historic preservation, and affordable housing. It's a way to get steady money in. Interesting, I mean, it's always a useful funding source. Interesting for Medfield, a lot of things are being funded without CPA, which means the town is picking up a greater share of those costs and a greater indebtedness. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was funded 3 years ago, I think, 4 years ago, that was bonded, you borrowed money for that. That kind of thing could have been funded from CPA. So it's a way maybe to increase the funding for these goals or to change where that funding comes from. So in the next 10 slides, look on the right side, there's a little green column, and the green column will talk about are those items chargeable to CPA or not. Interesting note that you as taxpayers are collectively spending about $150,000 a year in surcharges when you file documents at the Registry of Deeds. $250,000 last year, but last year was a particularly high year. That money is going to other communities all over the state for the state's match for CPA. So right now, Medfield's generously supporting lots of other communities, including some very rich communities, with year fees. Part of the reason for CPA is because the state does provide a generous match, about 30%, although it varies from year to year, that comes out of both general revenue. Yeah.
Somebody was playing on this.
Was that?
Something was coming up funny, some settings window.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay. I'm not sure I can do anything about it, so.
Oh.
All right.
So let me, if I
Yeah.
can just say one thing, Wayne.
course.
So the CPA has been discussed a few times in the past. Actually, Pete Peterson, our selectman, has just come into the room, and Pete has been a strong advocate for the CPA. And the timing wasn't necessarily ideal for that a few years ago, because we had a number of large expenses that were coming up. There was an override that was being voted on. But, I think the critical thing that we feel very strongly about is the money, and you'll see this, Wayne pointed it out, when we go through the goals, there's a green bar that's going to show all of the different programs as part of this that would qualify. And there was a discussion a few years ago that the amount from the CPA, that fund, was dropping. So you're getting in late, Medfield, so you're not going to get much of a payout. The reality is the state has put more money in. They funded it to a higher degree. There's significant dollars there available depending on what we choose as a community, if we choose as a community. So ideally, if we decided as part of this plan, a group would come together and ideally even next year at town meeting would try to get something on, at town meeting to be able to appropriate this. Because we are spending the money, we're just getting none of the benefits of some offsets from the state. So depending on how we do it, this can save the town a lot of money and still align with significant goals that we have, so.
Right. And I should add, communities are allowed to borrow against CPA, but that will be a separate discussion. So you could only forward fund projects. You could say, we're only going to pay for projects in the funds that we have on hand, we've collected from CPA, or town meeting would have to approve it. You can borrow against future years of CPA. So the same tools you have right now are available. Right now, you borrow against, general obligation for things like the housing trust. You could do that. You could be more conservative. So we're not opining on, do you want to just replace existing funds that are being spent, or do you want to add new funds? That's a separate conversation. That's not part of this. All right. So then the next 10 things, the next 10 actions, are all more sort of deeper in the weeds and things. So, the first is, of course, expanding on parks and recreation. If you don't travel over the state, you may not know how lucky you are that you have an incredibly good parks and recreation system. So it's not that we've identified any major gaps, but we've certainly heard lots of items from relatively low ticket, cost items like disc golf, which Parks and Recreation is working on, to, dog parks, to high ticket items like an indoor recreation facility. So those are all reflected in here as they make sense. We understand some things like disc golf are going to be a very short time period, and some like an indoor recreation facility, if that's eventually passed, is going to be a much longer time period. This is a 7-year plan. But 7 years typically means things that either get done in 7 years, disc golf, or planning towards things which may have a much longer planning horizon. So an indoor facility could be much longer. So again, I'm not going to go through this entire list. These came out of what we've heard from Parks and Recreation, what we heard at the first forum, what we've heard from comments. Many of these things were already in the townwide master plan, I guess, and the Medfield State State Hospital planning as well. The biggest focus we've heard was about physical facilities, but we also heard things about programming as well. And incidentally, anyone on the committee, feel free to interrupt or add to any of these items. Okay. So the next recommended action is to preserve additional conservation and greenway parcels. 38% is an impressive amount of land to have protected within the Boston metro area, right? Lots of rural areas in Western Mass have more, but within the metro area, it's pretty impressive. The recommendation isn't you should be going on a buying spree, but you always want to be ready because there are some key parcels that people love and adore, and as long as they're in private hands and protected, that may not be a problem. But if those came on the market, it could be a concern. So, how do you think of, how are you ready? How do you plan for buying key parcels that could be lost otherwise? Again, town meeting with select board approval or select board support has done this for years, so this isn't anything new. But it's sort of being aware. And so we have a list of, we try not to identify specific parcels unless they're really key parcels, but we more have a list of rules. What are the things that are important for doing? And part of this process would be working with partners, trustees or reservations, et cetera, to identify those parcels as they come up in the process. So accessibility is an important goal. The town has a separate Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan.
That doesn't show up on the recording, and
Okay.
the folks at home can't see it. It's just Mike fiddling.
Okay.
Doing important fiddles, but
So the town has a Americans with Disability Act transition plan. It's required, and the town's done a good job of keeping it up. The current version was 2021. I think the last version was 2019, maybe. It is a long shopping list. It's an expensive shopping list. We just looked at both the things on the list, which are for parks and recreation, and that's sort of an appendix. And then we particularly looked at some really easy improvements. They may not be the most important, but you technically don't meet Americans with Disability Act in some areas, and where that's going to cost you thousands of dollars, that's going to take a long time. But parks and recreation building. If you have an entrance which isn't accessible, you have to put a sign up that says, hey, the accessible entrance is on the other side, right? That's $75. There are some parking spots in 2 recreation areas that don't meet current standards. Again, $75, maybe it's $100. So we're trying to identify what are those easy things. What you're required to do under ADA is show both reasonable accommodation and a path forward. So, obviously do big ticket items when you can, but there are some things where you have a single obstacle which stops you from getting where. The ramp into Hinkley Pond doesn't meet ADA. Relatively inexpensive to extend the ramp out to get it to drop down to the right grade. And then that suddenly opens up a whole vast area that isn't, many people in wheelchairs can get to, but it doesn't meet the standard. So we tried to look at both those big picture items from the townwide plan and then specific low-hanging fruit type items. The next one, this is the good news, this is a really low-cost item. But, as someone who's not from Medfield, your branding and your signage is not the easiest to find. It's hard to figure out where some, particularly conservation areas, to a lesser extent recreation areas, where they are. Once you're there, some of the trails and the boundaries are hard to find. And so it's a great opportunity to improve branding, improve mapping. The town has protected a lot of open space. You want to put that in the hands of people who are able to use that land. So we have a series of recommendations. Again, they're all pretty inexpensive type things. And that's important both because you want to serve the public, right? So they know where the areas are. But also you have this practical privatization. There's some places where the boundaries aren't clear and neighbors always do, throw their leaves onto conservation property. And so marking the boundary is a good thing. So this all fits in that category. This is more of a mindset that fits a lot of things the town's talked about in the master plan, but just thinking about equity in everything that you do. And for the most part, you did fund the Affordable Housing Trust, so clearly there's been an emphasis on equity already. But just connecting the dots. So, I've worked with communities who say, hey, we want to protect open space, but we know when we take land out of the building inventory, it potentially makes building prices higher. Can we think if we're buying a large parcel of land, is there ever an opportunity to carve out a couple of building lots that might go for affordable housing? It's not driving it, but it's a mindset. So we have some lists for things that are there, and that includes activities. This is the programming side again. That includes programming to introduce people who maybe weren't used to using conservation and recreation areas in the past, right? People who came from households where, for lower income communities that didn't have parks and recreation, didn't think about those resources. So that sort of fits that one. The other action is something which the town has worked a lot with private consultants. In the last year or two, you've had a couple of consultants look at various aspects of your zoning and make recommendations. So I know you're already in the path for working on that. But specifically to open space, there are some other opportunities. So for example, if I owned a parcel of land and I just barely met the frontage requirements, the zoning frontage requirements, and there was some open space behind my parcel, I couldn't give the town a 20-foot sliver. Let's say I own this open space, and I said, hey, I really want to give the town 20 feet so people can walk to the conservation area behind me. But that might make the land not meet the zoning requirements. So some towns say, hey, if you give us land, we're willing to count that land you give us forever as if you owned it for zoning purposes. So again, we have a few specific recommendations that fit in that category of ways to either incentivize or allow people who want to help preserve.
I'll jump in on this one,
Yep.
since it's my personal favorite action item. So we have just a couple of open space residential developments here in Medfield. So we've got Tubrek, Bridlefield, Hawthorne, and Deerfield Drive. Yep. So the last one we had was probably more than 20 years ago. So we're the planning board's actually in the process now of updating and that bylaw. So you'll see that in the next couple of years at town meeting.
Yeah, I mean, the main rule I always tell people is the path that people on land get a lot of freedom to figure out how they want to use the land, but you want the path that you want them to do to be the easier path. So if a open space residential development, a cluster, requires a special permit, which basically means going hat in hand to the planning board and saying please, and a traditional subdivision is allowed by right, then it's easier for a developer to do a traditional subdivision. You can reverse that. So it's that kind of thing. So then, obviously, with the Medfield Rail Trail, you've done a lot with shared use paths, both shared use paths and sort of mountain biking and connecting path networks, very popular. More opportunities for them. Today in the snow, maybe I was stupid. I wandered across the railroad bridge between over the Charles River, but it's gorgeous, and I know that's still technically an active line, but I don't think trains, what did you say, they use it once a year to keep their rights alive?
No, actually, I think it's 4 times a day for freight.
No, not that one.
No, you're talking about
Oh.
the bridge over the river, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Sorry.
the same
Wrong one.
parked train that was there 6 months ago is still there.
Okay, I know what you're talking about now. Yes.
It is apparently still, the rights are maintained by the railroad for it to be an active line. That's why it can't be an extension of
Yeah.
the rail trail.
But it's just sort of thinking about that. And, obviously people do second bridges where you cantilever something. So it's sort of looking at, obviously, the existing trail. It's a new trail. There's been an incredible volunteer effort to maintain the trail, but volunteers may not be sustainable for years. So sort of there's everything from thinking about new trails to, what is the system for maintaining trails in the long term. You all probably know that Parks and Recreation is self-funded from user fees, so they can't necessarily take on new maintenance responsibilities that doesn't have a revenue source for them. Then the next one, Action 9, this is like equity in that this is about sort of a mindset. How do we think about everything through a climate change standpoint? So a lot of things on this category show up in different things, that there's parcels of land you might want to buy anyway, but they may become even more important from a climate change standpoint. That they're good places to store carbon. They're places that are already storing carbon. Almost by early on I showed you a slide of the soils, instead I'm just skipping over this. But wetland soils or soils in general in Massachusetts store more carbon than trees do in Massachusetts. So preserving wetlands, growing wetlands are important. So just sort of as a lens to think about everything you do in open space, and whether it's big things like buying land or small things like planting trees, that sort of has effects on climate. I think one of the strengths you have right now identified is Parks and Recreation does a really good job of maintaining the properties. So we don't have a lot here, but we do think more about some of those low-hanging fruit. Catching water on site and storing water in a grass swale instead of sending out to the street is good from a climate change standpoint, relatively inexpensive piece. So we have some things in that. None of those are big ticket items. And then, maintaining conservation areas. This is something that Medfield's doing a good job. It's sort of a mixed bag you have a lot of volunteers. So a lot of really good work is going on. but it's not necessarily coordinated. So there's some places where maintenance is better than other places. There's some places where it's neglected. The priority from my standpoint for maintenance is always things which might have greater costs later, right? So your people are avoiding a wet spot in a trail, and the trail is getting wider and wider, and it's going to cause erosion. So there's those kinds of things, or property lines that aren't marked, and someday you're going to get a dispute with a neighbor who's been dumping their leaves in it for years. So thinking about that process, I know I haven't gone through the right column, the CPA eligible piece, but you've seen it on the slides. Routine maintenance is not CPA eligible. Capital projects are CPA eligible. So that's sort of the quick overview, because again, we want your comments. We'll take comments now for as long as people want us. You can email your comments to the address here. Lauren is working on a survey that will go out very soon. It's going to be a really short survey. We are well aware of how many surveys you've all done, and frankly, we have a lot of data from those past surveys. There were just a couple of questions that we still had after reviewing all those surveys, so that's going to be here. And then once we get the surveys, we'll be revising the plan again. So the rest of the time is for you on, I assume you're MC this?
George, you want to say, you look like you want to say something.
I wanted to ask Wayne, could you tell the audience a little more about, what does it mean that why are we doing it now? And I know we have a
Yep.
June 30th deadline. And then what does it mean, approval by the state? Like, what benefit does it unlock?
Yeah, good.
Why are we doing this?
Okay.
Other than self-introspection.
So the plan serves two functions, two key functions. The first, hopefully the most important, is it helps you plan. It helps you think about what are your priorities. When you go to town meeting, when you do plans, when you think about regulatory changes, it hopefully gives you guidance in those process. And the state has a lot of grant programs. Some of the grant programs you're not eligible for if the state doesn't approve this. Land, which is for preserving open space, and you've certainly used. Park, which is just for preserving big regional parks. Federal land and water conservation funds, which come through the state. All those funds you can only get when you have a plan in place. And then there's a whole host of funds out there which don't require a plan, but the plan gives you proof that you really have some community consensus. So there's a grant called Mass Trails, which helps improve trails. That could be used for lots. It's a relatively small grant, but it's $100,000 isn't nothing. And those kinds of grants often look at the
And
plans.
accessibility projects, too.
And accessibility projects. So Mass Office of Disabilities has a grant, again, not required to be an open space plan, but they often look that you're really proving that you care about those things. So a lot of grants, those grants come and go. But I mean, the land, the park grant, the land and water have always been there, and in so many years it changes. The state it's a funny process. So the plan itself meets all the state checklists for what has to be in the plan. That we have to do an ADA assessment, for example. But it is totally a Medfield plan. The state does not tell you what your priorities are.
Stop sharing your screen.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
The state doesn't tell you what your priorities are. That's totally a local decision. The state just says, hey, if you're doing a plan, you have to look at issues for disabilities and you have to look at the environmental assessment. So.
What about, we can, if anybody has any questions here, but I also think I'd like to hear about the work that George is doing for the land inventory. Are there any questions in
Good
the
work,
room?
George.
Sure. Well, sure, I'm happy to pitch in. I hope everybody read the plan, it's there. There is it's section 5 is specifically, it's kind of the real drill down, we call it the land inventory, and it's an inventory of land in Medfield that is either publicly owned or privately owned and protected, or privately owned but not necessarily protected, but there's some public or open space interest in it, like these tax parcels that have special tax benefits because they're in recreation or whatever, where the town would have a right of first refusal if it came up to purchase it, for an open space interest or something like that. So we're trying to do an inventory of all of these parcels of land that have open space or recreation, current use or potential use or just town interest. Now, in terms of actual parcels, this is the thing, it gets confusing. In the town hall, and Sarah's been hard at work on it, and I know the Concom has a lot of this, and it's hard at
So
work.
the list behind Lauren.
But, you know,
is
but yeah, oh, there it is, yeah. That spreadsheet, like, you know, what does that mean? Well,
There's
it's,
200
what is it, like
parcels.
300 lines on it or something?
And as bad as it looks
And-
there, it's worse as a PDF in the document. which is
Oh,
right
yeah,
now,
I could not even,
Yeah.
yeah, for me, it was like, you know, I'm doing the thing like this to try and expand it on the screen, and then it just gets too blurry. So it was completely useless for me to look at. But the issue is that, it's funny, the way land is, you get, sometimes these areas that we think of as, say, Noon Hill, are actually, when you drill down on parcel maps, you find out there's like literally 50 different separate parcel IDs in a place that we just think of as Noon Hill. So what I've been doing is trying to take all of that information is a list of all of these parcels just by parcel ID. It's sort of very legalistic. And I'm trying to put it in a more user-friendly format by essentially aggregating parcels into, you know, just functional areas, and then giving a little description of the area, the access, and the condition, and you know, what are some sort of suggested or recommended actions the town might need to take or could potentially think of. And so just to give an example, so we've got Redgate Farm Conservation Area listed in there. It's a good example because it has 5. It's one of the easier ones because it was only 5 parcels in the aggregate that form Redgate Farm. It actually is very well marked and signed, and it's got great trail networks. It's very well used. It's a real jewel of the Medfield open space system. So that one was easy to write up. But then there's lots of others where the town has a beautiful spot, but there's not a good signage. A lot of people don't know. And from the survey that we did, and the last one of these open space forums, one of the biggest comments we got was, well, we hear that there's all this great open space in Medfield, but I can't find it. Where is it? You know, it's not on your website. I can't do it. And then, you know, and then that leads to situations where people may be thinking they're in Medfield open space, but they're actually trespassing, or it leads to other situations where somebody might, do something that they're not supposed to on public land, like build a mountain bike jump, which is, you know, or dump trash, whatever. And so the thing is, some of this is, so there's sort of positive benefits to getting notice out to people with where our open space, where's our trail system. Then there's protection benefits, you know, to the land, to like, you know, post the rules, no motorized vehicles, no alcohol, don't dump your trash, stuff like that. Anyway, so we're putting this inventory together. If you read the plan, I've been working on this. It's basically 1/4 done. It's got the quadrant, which is south of 109 and east of 27, is in the plan. And so any comments anybody has on any of those specific areas, fire away. I'd love to get the feedback, both on the kind of the format of like what type of information is useful, as well as if you actually have any substantive comments that like, oh, we missed something or whatever. Now, the other 3 quadrants of town, I'm working on. So don't read anything to the fact that if you're up by the hospital and you're wondering why didn't we list anything, it's just I haven't got to it yet, because it's a time-consuming exercise, but it's a labor of love, and I enjoy doing it. So I know that. Now, is there a deadline to like post a final version of the draft plan so that people can comment? Obviously, I didn't realize March 31st is the comment deadline, so you obviously need the more complete version pretty soon, right?
Yes, we posted the current draft that we'll be accepting comments on, but we can always supplement the inventory sections
Okay.
as you.
Well, I should have at least the
finalize.
next quadrant done by around the end of this week, well, middle of next week, let's
Yeah.
say. Give me a week, and then I'll have everything south of 109 done, and then I'll move up and do the other 2. It's funny that one of the northwest quadrant, which would be north of 109 and east of 27, that's actually going to be pretty easy because it's almost just all Army Corps of Engineer land, you know, along the.
So you're saving the the easiest for last.
Yeah.
It's good, good strategy.
Yeah, we got the updated, or the most recent Army Corps of Engineer maps that are part of the plan, but if anybody lives over there and is curious about more specifics, happy to share them.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, as PDFs as well.
Yeah, and again, for a lot of these areas, what we're trying to flag is just to know where the parcel is, and ultimately this can become a more public information source. We talked about, Wayne talked about the kind of branding where we might sort of have a more just unified system, call it Medfield Trails or something like that, and then have an online map that a sign out at the area can have a QR code just to scan it and see what the access information is and what the trails are. And, so that's what we're going. There's a lot of places where the town has a nice parcel of land with a scenic spot or whatever, and there's some type of access that's, legally the town will have access through an easement or something like that, but there's no marking and it's really hard to find. And like I said, that's, the good part is to let folks know, well, here's where the easement is, and then the protection is that then people aren't like trespassing through neighbors because they're looking for the easement and can't find it. And
So I want to thank George for all the time he's putting in. And actually, George is a pretty good indication of what's happening throughout the town, where there are passionate volunteers who love open space, who are giving hundreds of hours a year to try to make it happen, and they're all doing it individually. So the goal of this plan, and it certainly comes out of what the selectmen had asked, is before we think of, we get this great new piece of land that comes up and we have a town meeting to try to buy it, why don't we make sure we've got a plan to actually take care of what we already have? Mm-hmm. And that's sort of been the recurring theme over the past few years as the selectmen have been discussing additional open space. It's like, great, we take more on that we're not even fully maintaining what we have. We don't even fully understand between all the different groups that are working on this, who's responsible for it. It can't all fall on Park and Rec. It can't fall on the schools. There has to be some air traffic controlling across all of these, the 38% that's out there. And there are a few people like George who know where, and they're out there though, who know every parcel, but some of them are hiding it. Because that's the other thing we learned is some people don't want to let you know that there's, because they have their special place and they don't want anyone else to know about this great gem. But we'll deal with that battle after after we give our results. So we do have folks here. I don't know. Does anyone else on the committee want to say anything or?
I was just going to say that's one of the other excellent pieces of information that I know George has been working on in the spreadsheet is identifying also who in the town is responsible for maintaining these parcels. So you're able to kind of look up and use it as a glossary. So if it is a trail or something and you're seeing this big, groundswell starting to form, like who do you contact? Who do you notify?
And caveat on that is that in the section that we put together, I was cross-referencing to that spreadsheet to try to identify, this is a Concom parcel, this is water and sewer, this is, I don't know, well, I have Baxter Park in there just because it's open, it's town open space. I don't know who you say is in charge of that, but just the town.
So
It's
we
like-
have the care, custody, and control, and that's what all of us are kind of working on fact-checking
Yeah,
the
so my-
information
my-
that the assessors have is actually how the parcel was acquired and who's got
Yeah,
the responsibility with it.
Yeah, my caveat is that for that part, I'm cross-referencing to, or I'm just pulling the information from that spreadsheet. Because what happens is you look in, I use the MassGIS Property Viewer as a parcel identifier website, and the problem there is it'll just say Town of Medfield. It won't specify which board. So I'm using that spreadsheet, but there may be there may be little issues still getting clarified, is what
Yes.
I'm saying. That's the caveat.
But as anyone who's cleaned out your garage, once you get in there, you find a lot of stuff that you wonder how it ever
Yeah,
got
yeah,
there.
yeah,
So
yeah.
as we go through this, part
Yeah.
of the process of doing this is completing the plan so we can uncover, wait, I thought this was, so we're finding a decent amount of that, and that's a natural part of the process, but we have now a place to put it. We have a group of people who watched us struggle with technology. I'm sure we have some people online So at this point, it is open for questions, discussion. There's a microphone. If you could introduce yourself if you have any. Does anyone have any questions? Excellent.
Okay. Hi, Renee Schweikart, One Metacomet. I just have a question. I guess it's sort of about the nuance of how you categorize open space. Is this only for open space and recreation, meaning where we would be able to recreate? The question I had was about the open space or the field where we had our previous dump site, the landfill off of 27. Is that considered open space or not because it's not recreating?
Well, to
we're
answer
not
your
using it,
question,
so to speak?
while I haven't got to that section yet, I'll include that in open space, just because it's open and it's space. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's appropriate to,
Yeah,
what do you think?
Does it fall into
This does not include just recreation. So this is an inventory of conservation. Recreation is part of this, but it is open space and conservation. It's anything it's the 38%.
Yeah, it's a great question because to that point, so that's an area that is town-owned land, so that's on that list.
Yeah.
And so we're going through the list and just fact-checking who and who has care, custody, and control, and what it's used for. So something like the landfill, the former landfill, might not be considered part of what we're talking about here because you don't really have public access. We don't want you using it as an area of recreation because it's still in the process of being properly closed. So that I think would be a very unique circumstance. But then there are other parcels on that list that the town owns that would be considered open space, even though, say they were acquired as part of a settlement over a subdivision lawsuit or as undevelopable parcel. Some of the land on there might be, a quarter of an acre, but it contributes to the open space in the town, but that's something that you wouldn't get in trouble if you traveled on. And you might not even know it's there and it's town owned, so you might think it's just the woods that a neighbor owns, so some of these I'm actually having as good a time as George is going through this spreadsheet and learning more about the town land and how it was acquired.
Okay.
I mean, ironically, to answer your question more, ironically, the Bay Circuit Trail passes through a little slice behind the former dump where I think not over the dump, but behind it, and I think so I think it's on the parcel of land that includes the dump, although the trail's not going over the dump itself. So, I don't know, for that reason, the parcel gets on the list, but I think for environmental reasons or other regulatory reasons, I don't know the full explanation of, there's nothing else that can be really done with that right now.
So the focus is definitely on human use in some way, shape, or form, because
Yeah.
we know that obviously the landfill will be used by other species, maybe just not ourselves, right? So, okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
And I think that they're pursuing a town meeting last year or the year before, it got authorized for solar.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
So
yeah,
that's
okay, I didn't
might
know
be,
that, okay, okay.
Exploring. No,
No,
it was
no,
just
no.
authorized for pursuing it, yeah, so.
Mel?
Mel Seabolt, Medfield Parks and Rec Commission. George, what you're speaking about was the compilation plan for the various owners of the different properties in town?
Yeah, well, the legalistic compilation plan is that spreadsheet. What I'm doing is just trying to aggregate areas into a more functional description of the particular area and present a more user-friendly description.
Yeah, I think we just had basically research on Hinkley Pond and Hinkley Park.
I understand that's confusing,
Perfect.
yeah.
It's very confusing.
Yeah.
Initially, we thought we might have to get permits from Concom. As it turns out, basically, care, custody, and ownership is Parks and Recreation. Concom does have jurisdiction in some of the areas. And for us, with a projected new park going in within the year, it's extremely helpful just to know where the lines are drawn. And I mean, if you have to do that on every parcel, that's going to be pretty intense, so.
But there are priorities, you know, obviously, when you've got a park going in there, then we've got to get clarity on it. There's some lots that I'm sure 5 years from now we'll still be exploring. It's a big town.
Oh, yeah.
There's some areas out there that are, but within this plan, the whole idea is within the next 7 years prioritizing, I mean, getting as much of this done as George can, but I promise you there will be components of that are, you know, that's still, and then, sorry.
Well, so we.
Can we call you in Mansfield?
Well, I'm here until.
For the next 3 years? Okay. All in favor, I'm sorry.
So, no, but part of this committee's task from the select board was to, you know, sort of update and kind of get a handle on land management for the town. And it's probably a longer conversation than the time frame that we've also been tasked with too. So our existing open space and rec plan expired in November. So the goal is to get this plan to the state in June, by June 30th, to get it in place for the next 7 years so that we are eligible to apply for those funds if they're needed. But it's possible that this land management piece of it is going to be a little bit more ongoing because of the need for multiple boards and commissions and staff members to review every parcel and actually document how they are currently taking care of these parcels and what might the future plan for the parcels be. So I don't know that, I think that we want to have George's portion and my portion done for the June 30th deadline, but I think it is in the realm of possibility that it's still going to be evolving on the exact management plans for each of those areas.
I can add one thing that you and I talked about just before the meeting, but one thing the committee has been really trying to work hard on is to put people like me out of business. So the goal is to make this a good plan with a lot of information so that you don't have to hire consultants yearly to update it or 7 years to do a new plan. It becomes a more in-house process.
Indeed, we've been doing this in-house for the past 20 plus years. And so we hired Wayne this year to sort of, you know, have a checkpoint, right? So get us so we can do this again for the next 20 plus years in-house. And that's what we want to do is leave this plan in a really good form for the next generation of open space and rec planners.
Yeah, and I guess we should also acknowledge there was a group of volunteers who worked on the previous plan and got it close to the finish line. And then the state came back with a number of questions, and by that time, literally, that was only done by volunteers. Mm-hmm. So having Wayne has been a blessing for us to be able to accelerate this process. But I also want to thank the people who had spent years of their own time to get us to this point, because we actually have a lot of information from that previous iteration. So in other words, I'm saying we coasted. No, we didn't. Other than George, who's working diligent. We started not from ground zero. We didn't have to do another survey. We had ample data. We had a lot of good work from the townwide master plan, from the state hospital project, and from the goals of the selectmen. So the good news is open space, recreation, conservation, water. This town is passionate about those things. And there have been a lot of people who have spent a lot of their personal time to make that, to make Medfield better on that.
There's two things. One is if there is anybody online, feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. And Deb Barrow did note that for the Hinckley property, there is a small portion of the Hinckley property that is actually owned by the Conservation Commission that isn't actually sort of parceled out. So this compilation plan for Hinckley property that we're doing right now recognizes that, and it actually brings it in the forefront of where exactly the Conservation Commission's land is as opposed to Parks and Recreation's land. And is it, Lauren, would you like to talk about the survey just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, because I think because it is it's a short survey,
It's very
but I think that the way that Lauren and Wayne and Jerry particularly put their heads together to design this quick survey is pretty.
Brilliant.
I was about to say I was going to say genius. Yes, indeed.
Wow, we just tore some rotator cuff out of ourselves on the back there. Whoa.
Yeah. This is the type of stuff the information that we actually are looking for here at this point in time.
Well, it's very short. I don't want to give away too much because I don't want people to think too much into how we're asking the questions, but it's just asking the community to reflect on these priorities and actually prioritize them. If we said how important are these, hopefully everybody would say these are all very important. Conservation, maintenance, a new community center, all of these are important, but asking these questions in such a way that encourages prioritization and, the application of resources. So it is very short. It'll take less than 5 minutes. As a parent with kids in 2 different schools here, I know some of the fatigue that we all have around surveys. So it's designed to be, less than 5 minutes, but to really give us good data around what are the priorities of the community as we, everything in this plan is wonderful and should be something that as a community we're all aspiring to achieve. But if we think about priorities, especially over the next 7 years and allocation of resources, where as a community do we really want to allocate that? So it's almost done unless anything, glaring comes up in this meeting today, and hopefully we'll get it out to the community, within the week. So for a quick turnaround, we'd love as much response as possible.
Mel.
Just going through I did a cursory read of the draft, and just looking at Parks and Recreation issues. Pages 85 to 90, you have the Parks and Recreation facility inventory, and you have the Medfield Rail Trail and Bay Colony Trail listed as one of our facilities, which it is not.
Oh, I didn't do that
No, I'm
section.
just, no, I'm
on
not
the
looking
plan.
at you.
He's looking at all of us. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I know.
No,
I
it's
keep,
just
I keep
there, it's
thinking
just
people
something
are
there.
looking at me when they're pointing to this. I keep thinking people are
Oh,
looking at me, which is
okay.
why I
It's just
moved,
there,
so.
and where this is a draft.
Yeah.
Yes, oh, absolutely. This is what we want.
And lastly, Lauren had spoken about Hinckley. We will have an issue there also with Lowell Mason, which Parks and Recreation basically gave them the land to place the structure there. And that was quite some time ago, and the lease has not been finalized. So that will be another issue. You may want to get in touch with town council on it.
I actually have been in touch with town council, and I met with Russ Hallisey from the Lowell Mason board today, because I wanted to get his input before we finalized the compilation plan with Wayne Carlson, and more of an offline discussion, but the boundary, the delineation for the Lowell Mason isn't actually ready. It's not, they still need to figure out some parking and permitting issues before they do there. So we're not going to show the Lowell Mason boundary on that compilation plan, and we'll just defer to them for them to work out with you and town council when that time comes.
Okay. Good.
Other folks here? Do we have anything on the?
Just a
Jeff, the floor recognizes Jeff.
Thank you. Jeff Lyman, Metacomet Street. Can you talk, you mentioned the branding or the trail, the wayfinding. Can you talk a little bit more detail about that? Did you say there is a plan in place, or are you still trying to identify a partner and, external partners to help develop that, or volunteers? Just curious what the plan is on the
So
signage.
the quick one, and then I'll let George step in on this as well as on Wayne. This was a universal piece of feedback. It's part of the 7-year plan. There is no plan to do it yet. It's the plan to actually make the signage, the branding, prioritize where we do it, that all has to come out of the approval of this plan. And if there are grants and money to help us do that, or if there's some level of funding to get some signs, we need to go through the cost associated with that. But by all indications, this appears to be, the easiest thing, some signs, some larger things. There are apps now that are available where if we name things correctly, we call them the same. The work that George is doing to group them all under one thing. We have subdivisions that to the outside world mean nothing, that if you just called it, Noon Hill, that's probably enough, and here's the mapping for it. But George, you've done a little more work on this.
Yeah. Well, the concept, I should mention, there's a separate organization in town that I'm involved with called the Friends of Medfield Forests and Trails. And, this is something, we've talked about promoting for years, but we're just a small nonprofit organization, although we'd like to get bigger. But the concept is just to take, we have trails all over the town, and they're amazing. I mean, we have the Bay Circuit Trail, sort of for official trails. We have the Bay Circuit Trail goes through the Charles River Link Trail, and then of course we have beautiful trail networks that are very well marked and described at Trustee of Reservations properties. For town properties, it's kind of hit or miss. Redgate Farm is an example where it's done really well. There's good trails, but there's no real map. There's just, if you live there, you know your way around. Then there's other places where it's really just, exploring. So the concept is create a brand called Medfield Trails. And Medfield Trails would not be necessarily a separate any organization, but it's just a way to unify mapping and identifying trails all over town into one system. Now, I can remember one of the things that the Friends of Medfield Forests and Trails did over 20 years ago was actually put out a paper map that did this kind of thing. The difference now is technology allows us to develop. I don't know if anybody uses Trail Forks or All Trails, any of those, or the Bay Circuit Trail uses I forget which their app is called. Or what's the one that's the MAPC app?
Oh, yeah, which has some errors on it, landlines.
Okay. Anyway, the point is there's apps that you can create an interactive map. It's just online. We don't have to spend years and years developing it and then print it at a big cost and then, discover that you made some mistake. It can just be online and it can be altered very quickly. Like the Bay Circuit Trail is a good example. We had to relocate a small portion of that in Medfield around near where the, on Ice House Road, near where the Senior Center is, because part of it is we discovered behind it kind of went on some private property, which was a mistake, shouldn't have done that, but also the development of that other Hinckley parcel. So temporarily, the Bay Circuit Trail is relocated. I sent an email to the guy who works for the AMC that runs that map, and within 24 hours, it was relocated on the app. So if you were actually a through hiker on there and you followed it, within 24 hours, you had the new version of the trail. So anyway, so the idea would be Medfield Trails, look into getting an app like that. And then, now, the cool thing is, like if you go in Rocky Woods, the trustees it's so wonderful. Every trail intersection, you have a printed map. They printed a map and it says, you are here. Well, with this app, you don't have to do that. What we do is we can create a bajillion signs and literally put them on, those like lawn sign sticky things. They just say, Medfield Trails, scan this QR code. And we just put these everywhere. You scan the QR code, the GPS, the little blue dot tells you where you are, and you're right on the map, and you can find your way around. So that would be the idea. Now, so technology makes it so we can do this pretty easily, but it's still going to cost a bit of money. But this is the type of thing that we might be able to apply for a Mass Trails grant to do, as long as it's in this plan.
And some of it is some is eligible for CPA if we approve.
Yeah. And then plus we would want to leverage like a lot of volunteer support through actually the way these trail app works is they're sort of crowdsourced. Like Trail Forks is just all crowdsourced.
Use it in there.
And so we can activate a volunteer network through the Friends of Medfield Forest Trails to build that up.
So again, to recap, that's action 5 of the 11, actions for the 5-year plan: conservation, recreation, and trail and property line wayfinding, clear branding, online maps, downloadable PDF maps, curated trail app, simple naming conventions. That's all part of that. So anyone at home who's figuring out what they're going to do for the night, you can plow into the draft and serve up action number 5.
And to be clear, we would need the sign off on the different care and custody boards. And so, but that's the whole thing, is that, like, for example, some of these good areas, like down behind the Wheelock School, for example, there's this whole vast area of town land between Elm Street over and through to 27. And it's beautiful. And that's like, I didn't count it, that's over 25 different parcels. Some are, well, you got Wheelock School's obviously school department. Otherwise, you have kind of it's like a handful, maybe half a dozen are water and sewer, and then the other are Concom, but they're all kind of mixed in. And then you have the power line in there too, so I'm counting Eversource as an open space property on the power line. So, hey Jim, so anyway, that's, so the point is, like, instead of, each board with its different, they would all have to sign off, but if they sign off, then, what the public sees is, one trail system that goes through all there, even though it's, a bunch of different town owners.
And the only thing I would add to that is we have representation from some of the town boards that are directly impacted by this. But, this comes out of the townwide master plan, which was more big picture general guidelines. And then from there have been specific projects that have been rightfully allocated to the specific town departments that handle it. So Sarah's been doing a ton on the, wayfinding just in town, the signage in town. That came out of the townwide master plan. This is a more focused drill down. And by approving this plan, not only are we eligible for funding, but then town boards understand, okay, we've agreed. We at least have a common roadmap. So when we're deciding to do this, it's not like someone who yelled loudest, yeah, we need some signage, let's get a citizens petition for signage. No, we've agreed. Now we have to factor in, what this actually looks like, how it fits in with the other priorities. You'll have the beautiful survey that will gauge, I won't give it away, but it will help us in allocating resources within the town and where people think are most important. This is, by all indications, low-hanging fruit that would have high benefit, but you all might come back and, yes, we have a question.
Yes, we have a question and a comment, and so I'm going to read the comment first, and then the question. Robert Kearns from Charles River Watershed Association. Thank you for your great meeting and fantastic plan. We will be providing written comments, but wanted to congratulate the town for this plan and offer our support for CPA and climate change and resiliency efforts. And then Jeanette, her question specifically is there a strategy to try to get the townspeople to vote yes on CPA, as been tried several times in the past?
Yes, and actually Pete asked me a few years ago, the year that we were going to consider an override, if I would take that baton that year, and that was not a particularly good year to do it. But we've just come out of a whole series of projects where we've been asked at town meeting to spend money directly without any offsets by the state. And so some of the discussions that in the past on CPA, if this is approved, our goal would be to get a committee to try to get this to come to the town meeting next year. Because honestly, sort of two critical things. If you look at the number of towns that around this area have CPA and are using it, it is phenomenal, the number of towns that are doing it. And contrary to what the other thing that was happening a couple of years ago, one of the knocks against it was the town is reimbursing less. So if you get in late, you're getting a much smaller reimbursement. So you're paying the money on the surcharge, but you're only getting 18 cents on the dollar now, and it used to be 35 cents. Well, they've actually, again, refunded it. So if you're looking at the money that's being allocated in these CPA, approved projects, it's real money. And I can tell you, like, we literally, if you go into the plan, all of the things we talked about that are eligible, we pay out of pocket now without any reimbursement. So whether it's affordable housing, whether it's what we're trying to do with conservation, what we're trying to do with, preservation, recreation, all of these things that we're trying to do, we get no money back from the state. And as Wayne said at the beginning of this, right now, we're spending between $150,000 to $250,000 a year on surcharges that we're paying on registry of deeds, on transactions that go to other communities. We don't get any of it back. So I think that there is a lot more awareness about this, and I'm certainly very passionate about trying to get this considered. It doesn't have to be 3%. You can go 1%, 2%, 3%. There's different ranges of it. And Wayne put on that slide, which we'll make available, what that actually translates to a tax bill. But I will say again, if you add up all the projects we've paid 100% of from our tax dollars, you're looking at 25 to 30% reduction in a number of those projects that we would get back from state money. So again, I know we've had a number of projects where the push has been, look at the state money we get if we file this program, and here's money with CPA that every year we kick down the road. So that's a really good question. I personally think it's overdue for us to reconsider it. Like everything political, there will be other sides of it, and I look forward to that engaged discussion. Any other?
Nothing else.
That's it? How about in the room? Pete Peterson. How does it feel to be on that side, Pete, and not up here? You gonna ask me the tough questions?
Pete Peterson, 10 Copperwood Road, Medfield, and I guess I just wanted to, it feels fine to be on this side, so thanks for letting me sit out here.
Thank you for being there.
I came down because the Zoom wasn't working, so I was trying to listen to you online, and it didn't work out for me, and fortunately I was close. So I just wanted to share with you some of the things that really give me joy about Medfield, and because I think they're sort of easy things that maybe the town can do. So when I moved here in '89, I was running marathons, and so a lot of the way that I saw the town was by going out and running places. And it took me about 10 years, but I figured out I could cross into Sherburne and go down the Charles on one side, cross over at Farm Street, and come back on the Dover side. I explored Rocky Woods that way. I got over to Noon Hill that way. And I found some, it took me forever to find the trails into Rocky Woods because they weren't marked. You're basically walking between two houses. You have to know that the trail, it wasn't until somebody told me and educated me. So I think that's the first thing. We need signage. I challenge anybody to go through the Jade Walk right of way down to the river. Right. You're walking across people's lawns. It's their side yard, basically, and we need a sign there that just makes you feel comfortable walking through their side yard. So the things that I really like are the connectors. I use the rail trail from Ice House Road to Harding when I bike from my house to my office in the downtown. It's wonderful. What a great addition. I love the little connector from Wilkins Glen out to 109. It's just a sidewalk, but it gets you through. It's a perfect way. You avoid the traffic. I love going in at Wheelock and coming out on 27, except at 27, it's not where I want to be.
Yeah.
There was somebody that I was working with on Wild Holly who explained to me that they back up to the land at Wheelock, and they were talking about putting through a little easement for the town. And it didn't happen, but what a great thing that would be for the people and the kids in town if they could just cut through something like that. So those are the sorts of things that signage to make you feel comfortable walking through a side yard at Jade Walk. The same thing on coming out into the Caldwell development on Rocky Woods. The entrance to the trail is basically blocked by a huge bush, and so it's the last time I went there, it was not very visible. But if there was a trail marker, a trailhead, a sign, you'd feel pretty comfortable, I think, just going around it. And those little connectors, like that one through Wild Holly, if you could just find some people to create those are the things that really make me happy when I'm going around. So I'm hoping that you guys can figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah, that's great feedback.
Thanks.
And I think we have it in here in general. And then the key will be the details of what plan we put in place to actually execute on that. And again, I would also throw in some of the concerns we heard when we were saying we do things like that, people are like, well, that's going to bring more traffic. More people now will know about this spot. And to be honest, we have so much open space that if we actually open it all up and do a good job of educating people, I think it's going to spread people out. I think they'll enjoy more of the trails and more of the open space. Because right now, to your point, there's some places you do feel like you're a criminal going across.
And let me say, that's an equity issue also. I mean, equity
Good point.
is a goal in our plan. To have an easement that goes in between a couple of houses, but because like the attitude is, let's just keep it secret, and if you live in the neighborhood, it's legal to go through there, but let's not tell anyone else. That's an equity issue.
That's a good point.
And so equity for everyone else in the town, or equity for the public that would have a right to travel through there, so.
Pete, I just want to say, I think you and my husband would be friends, because when we first moved here, he would come home and he would download a GPS, and it just looked like he was like it was like scribbles on the thing trying to find. And I remember the one day he found the stuff connected. He was like so happy when he could figure out a way to go, out 8 or 9 miles and come back 8 or 9 miles. So I understand when you find those trails, it really does feel special. And I agree. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to share these. I mean, we have abundance, and it's important to share.
So Lauren, one of my things that I did was I tried to figure out the trails in Dover and Sherburne by getting trail maps from them. And what someone told me later was that they don't want to share those.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is,
That tracks.
and the funny thing with app, I mean, that's where then the apps come in. You can use like the heat maps feature on Strava, and that's where it'll show you where there's not even a trail, but people have gone through the woods. It gives you, it starts to show in a faint line, like a trail. So it's like, I don't know, maybe that's, then you sometimes pick up private information off of that, but that's what Strava does.
That's a whole other meeting.
We had a couple of other people come in. Do you have any questions, or we're in the open?
Yeah, Jim Sullivan, 8 Linden Court. I lived on Hartford Street for a long time, the Rocky Woods house, so I'm very familiar with the trails that Pete was mentioning, and I would second that if we could have a map. I don't know, 20 years ago I worked with Mike Stanley on the open space committee, and we marked a lot of those trails and we did trail maintenance, but some of those trails are disappearing, and I'm not sure which ones have valid easements and which ones are private, but that would be good to figure out. I know there's a trail on off of Foundry Street on the dirt part where there's a little parking lot there now, and there's signs, but then it dead ends, and there's no trail there. So it just if we could get an updated map or that would be helpful.
Yeah, the inventory will definitely be part of that, and the work is that George is doing of sort of grouping it in common sense, not legal, that's the actual list of all of it. And again, that's painful. I say that, but Sarah's been doing the work to clean it. So thank you, Sarah. But making that usable, and then, that's Noon Hill. That's all of this, and here are the trails, as opposed to a list of all of the individual properties. It's great feedback. And I would just say on the draft that's available now of the plan, it's 135 pages, and you're going to go, oh my God, 135 pages. It is grouped in ways that you can get to the important parts fast. So I'm not saying everything is not important, but there are things that are there because they're required as part of the document. But the history of Medfield, it's interesting. I learned some things, but if you already know that and you want to get directly to it, the index of that will get you into the sections. And the big thing for us to consider, we want all eyeballs on it, but the 11 action steps, like for the next 7 years, that part of it is really where we need as much input as possible, because that's going to frame the actions that come out of this and the prioritization of when we actually take each of those on. So you don't have to read the full 135 pages. Some of you have, and some of you will. But don't be scared when you see 135 pages. It's some charts, it's some maps, so it's not as scary as it looks.
We have one public comment that came in, and I'll just read it since Sarah stepped out for a minute. This is from Chris McHugh Potts. I failed to comment about this on the form, but it would be great to incorporate into the plan some kind of action to educate residents on the various mechanisms that can be used to preserve private property. For example, conservation restrictions, deeds, etc. It may even just be a matter of steering people to additional resources. And just to clarify, the idea is to educate residents on how they can preserve their private open space for future generations in public use.
I won't comment since she's my wife, and I would obviously agree with this, but does anyone else
Well,
want to?
obviously, you know, one method is a conservation restriction. You know, you can have a conservation restriction placed on property which protects it, essentially conveys the development rights, while the property still is your private property. Then there's various forms of public access conservation restrictions and so on. Now, and I see Susan from the trustees is here. First I was going to say, you know, we meant, you know, the trustee of reservation is obviously a very important partner in open space in Medfield, and the trustees does a great job with preservation, but also with the access and, you know, and inclusion issues. You know, really making, you know, you know, Rocky Woods, No Hill. That's not just for people from Medfield. Those are jewel resources for the, you know, the whole region. But so you have those properties, but you also have you maintain conservation restrictions on other parcels, which that's kind of like a separate line of business you're in. But I don't know. Do you want to, Susan? Do you want to mention anything about how that works?
If we have the microphone, if we can. That's for the people at home. We can hear you, but this is going out all over the world. Don't be intimidated. But just on the East Coast. There's a delay on the West Coast.
Susan Lewis, and I'm actually in the process of moving down into this area from Hamilton. I'm at 8 Linden Court with Jim. I'm with the trustees. I'm not in the conservation land con group. I am in development, so that's when everyone sort of kind of backs up and stays away from me. But but basically, I'm really excited to be coming down into this community. I am sort of blown away. I didn't know anything lower than Linfield, so now as I come into Medfield, I notice how much open space is here. Just from the trustees' development office, you know, talking to our donors and people that are in the community, I'm blown away by how many properties are safe down here. But I do agree, you know, I know the trustees, we need to work on our signage as well, and, you know, posting trails and things like that within our properties. But also, I don't think I could access the trail system that Jim brings me on when we're mountain biking or walking or hiking without him, because a lot of it, I'm like, are we allowed to be here? Is it okay we're here? Like, I could do it with him. I can't do it on my own, so I can understand the signage and sort of education that way. And I do, one of our pillars is trying to have this sort of opening up trail systems. Part of our mission of the trustees is to first save the property and then get people on the property. So, you know, that's how you're educating your next generation of conservationists and things that are, people are gonna, if you keep people from property, they're not gonna want to save that property. And they're not gonna want to be invested in that property. So it's really important that we get that next generation on and open it up to everybody as well. And again, I'm in the development office, but I've been with the trustees for 10 years. If we need to get people involved, I could pull in DA, who is our general manager in this region, the Charles River Valley, and really happy to help and be a part of this whole thing.
Thank you, and I think that is part of what we're trying to do is all of these amazing organizations. I think trustees were one of the first things when I moved to Medfield. It was through the Stanleys, and they were incredibly generous with their time and sort of educating us about the history of how all this open space happened, and it happened because of people like them, right? Individuals who cared and who preserved. You know, Chris's question actually, and I have to sort of tie this in. We're on Kingsbury Pond, and there is a very large wetlands area that's part of our property. We own 11 curve and 7 curve. That is just beautiful. It runs, 365 days. It's got water there all the time. It's got a hot stream that comes out. We want to do something with it, and both of us are pretty actively engaged, and we don't know the best path to go. And I think what she's saying is she wants some advice. No, but I'm sure there are other people out there. So like between Medfield TV or just forums or bringing together the next generation of the Stanleys who are more than willing to share their passion of the options. And George, you started to do this of talking about, okay, well, here's the kind of things you could be doing, because I do think there are a number of people in this town who, if given the information, would be willing to think that way, but just don't even know the questions to ask.
I think that's a great point. I mean, there are, in my experience in real estate, there are different ways that you can kind of reclassify your property. And some are in perpetuity, so you can really hold it in preservation in perpetuity. So if it ever gets transferred via sale or inheritance or anything like that, the next generation can't really make any changes. There are also ways that you can do it so they're just temporary restrictions. So if you don't want to really kind of pigeonhole whoever may be taking hold of the property later on, or restrict anybody else from doing something with it, but for the time that you own it, you want to allocate it for some type of preservation, there's options to do that as well too. So I'd be interested to hear, because I think Sarah might have some really great resources as to
There's other, the trustees are probably the biggest player in the local conservation restriction game, but there's also Charles River Watershed Association and a couple other smaller group, Dover Land Trust is in Dover, but there's others that can be partners for land conservation restrictions as well.
So, other questions? Anyone here? Anyone online? Wayne, do you have any thoughts?
No, these are great. I can address something like I think what you're talking about is sort of an outreach brochure, which I wouldn't be doing, but I could certainly plan, list that as a goal, and I could do a table on what are the different techniques that places use. So at least it's in one place. And I think a few of the comments fit of I'll be making some changes to the plan to reflect those comments.
Was anyone, is Kat here? Is she online? Do we have any Concom comments, I was wondering?
I'm not.
Deb was
seeing
online before.
Cat on here right now.
I don't know.
Yeah, Deb is still on.
Deb,
I
would
don't
you-
know if you want
Any?
Yeah.
Can
She's the only one
online
I
folks
see right
actually
now.
speak, or is that not?
I don't know the answer. I know they can type. I don't know if they can speak.
Okay.
No, they have to be promoted.
Yeah.
And they can type if they're interested, and we can promote them as
yeah.
being a panelist, but,
Okay.
Do you have a specific question?
No,
you'd like to
I was
address?
just inviting feedback. We got Parks
Yeah.
and Rec. Thank you.
There's like some audio things happening right now.
Oh.
What's going on?
So we would have to be promoted to, panelists to get the audience.
No, it's fine. I just was like.
Or are you getting
echo.
feedback?
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's why I also muted it. So.
but, as of now, she hasn't volunteered.
So I don't want to put anybody in spot.
No, if she had a question,
Yeah, correct.
if you want to chat, if you do want to speak, we don't want to put anyone on the spot, but just as, I think the words everyone wants to hear, we're close to the end, so we're winding down at this point, so if there's something, no, you're sad about that, aren't you?
I'm just upset about the gremlins I've been having all night.
Well, apologies for anyone who's had issues on the sound. We were 14 minutes late getting in, but this is not the last opportunity for you to give feedback. So just to reiterate, you can go to the email, which is osrp@medfield.net. You can send an email on anything in the plan. There is actually, I believe, a hard copy of the plan for people who like to come in and I know some people who don't want to make comments on a PDF and don't want to go on page 31, whatever. So there is an actual physical copy of the plan in the building. Sarah can hook you up with that if you email OSRP. Go to Starbucks and come on down with your maca laka haka and and make some comments on the draft plan.
We just got one note from Deb, just chimed
Okay.
in. She just asked if we're asking if ComCon wants to give any feedback.
What's that?
Tonight, we're in the plan overall.
Well, I think the answer is yes in the plan overall, right?
Totally yes,
Yes.
100%. And does she want
And
any
then
feedback
we just
tonight?
wanted to give, I guess, Deb an opportunity, or anybody from Concom an opportunity to chime in regards more specifically to the advice, I think, or reference to resources as far as like preservation opportunities for existing landowners.
Well, or anything.
Or
I
anything
mean, just,
at
we
large.
had Mel from, Parks and Rec. I guess one thing to clarify, in this land inventory, we've got Concom parcels, and then we've got all the other, and again, the caveat was, I was doing the best I can to follow that spreadsheet, but there's probably errors in designation of parcels as Concom versus water and sewer in certain places.
But I think Sarah's addressing that.
Yeah, we're
There's
working through that.
inconsistencies,
Yeah. And to be clear, that, Concom would, any sort of actions or suggestions about things involving Concom care and control of land would be under their jurisdiction to, approve or say, yes, we want to do that, or no, we don't. But at least having these things in the plan gives us the opportunity to apply for the grant money for them.
And obviously, Kat being, although not here tonight, she is our liaison always to be able to pass. But at any point, the draft is out there. We encourage any comments to be submitted. We've got a window here until the survey goes out until the end of the month. Public comments we're going to take until the 31st. So this is the month, if you were looking what to do, it's to hunker down with a good open space and recreation plan draft and get your pen out or get your device and
I heard it might snow again.
it
this
could
week.
snow,
Yeah,
and what
it's a
would be better
perfect-
than comments
Perfect activity.
on open space and recreation plans.
So Deborah just chimed in again and said, Concom fields questions about land preservation opportunities, but we often give general info and suggest that landowners consult with their attorneys and financial folks.
Yes,
So just wanted to put that in there. Thank you, Deb.
and the lawyers, thank you for that too, because you can't really do any of it without good legal representation. And I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV. Any questions here before we,
And just that, I think,
please?
as part of this whole thing, what I think we want to focus on is what are the obstacles, whether it's the information obstacles or the regulatory obstacles for people who want to preserve land. Yes, they've talked to the lawyers, yes, they have to be willing in the first place, but at least we don't want to be the ones that stop them from doing those things.
Well said. I'll go down to the committee. Any last comments? Surveys coming. You get paid by the number of results, right?
Is the next step in the survey an email? Is it going to go out? Is it be a news flash on the
Yeah,
town
I just
website?
want you guys to check it off, make sure you're okay with it. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know the best way to disseminate through all the social media and on the town's website and yeah, hopefully we get lots of respondents just to help with the prioritization. We have so many opportunities for open-ended questions. This is really more of a conclusive versus an exploratory study. It's more like really putting some numbers to prioritization, and it's not an open-ended kind of thing. There's other opportunities for that by emailing and filling out the form online. So please fill out the survey. It'll literally take you less than 2 minutes.
Anything you want to add, or?
Nope.
Good, George?
No, thank
And
you.
also thank you for the work you're doing on pulling this all together. Wayne, any last?
No, this has been great.
Excellent. Assuming no more questions here, I don't want to cut anyone off.
I'm not seeing any more questions. Anybody want to raise their
I'm
hand
not
out
gonna
there? if they
beg
have
for more,
anything?
because we're
I
at
know,
6:20, so.
okay.
Thank you for those of you who came out tonight, and I think at this point we will, I guess, do we need a motion to adjourn?
Do we have a motion to open?
I don't think we did. But we're here. It's in a public forum, so.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? I think we can do it this way because of, okay, I deem it unanimous.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all for coming out.
Thanks.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.